So welcome everyone to our first webinar of the year. I'm excited to have you all. My name is Virginia Siegel, and I am, just for accessibility purposes, I am a white woman with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing a gray sweater with a red scarf, and my background is blurred. But I am the folk arts coordinator for Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts. We are the state folk arts organization here in Arkansas, and we do a lot of programming. But one thing I'm passionate about is making sure that our programming is accessible. And so, of course, there's a lot to learn, but there's also some special considerations for those of us who are involved in cultural programming. And so before I introduce our guest, I do also want to note that this is going to be the first of several webinars we'll have this year. So please keep an eye on Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts website and social media and University of Arkansas News so you can find out about our upcoming webinars. But to get started, I'd like to introduce Lilli Tichinin of New Mexico Arts. She'll tell you a little bit more about her background, but Lilli is a folklorist, accessibility coordinator, and an all-around amazing person. So Lilli, I'm going to turn it over to you. And you are muted.
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah, sorry. I'm having some screen share issues, as you can probably tell that I'm sharing and unsharing. So bear with me for just a minute. I think we should be good now. Now that I'm unmuted, I think we should be good. There we go. Okay. So hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Lilli Tichinin. I am a white woman with short curly hair. I'm wearing brown glasses and a burgundy sweater, and you can see the yellow walls of my living room behind me. First of all, huge thank you to Virginia for inviting me to do this and for making this happen, and to Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts and to the University of Arkansas Libraries as well. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I'm Lilli Tichinin. I am currently the program coordinator for folk arts projects, and accessibility for New Mexico Arts, which is the state arts agency in New Mexico, and it's part of the Department of Cultural Affairs. I have my contact info here, but I will also make sure you have that elsewhere as well. A little bit of background about me in terms of culture work and accessibility. I have a master's in folk studies from Western Kentucky University, and I've been in my current role for about the last 7 years, and previous to that, I was the accessibility coordinator for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival for 2 years. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from unceded Tewa land in what is now presently called Santa Fe, New Mexico. I also want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I do encourage you to put questions in the chat as we go. Both Virginia and I will be keeping an eye on those, and I'll be pausing throughout to answer some of your questions. And I'm hoping to leave a little bit of time at the end for that as well. I would love if everyone could please put your name, where you're coming to us from, and organizational affiliation, if that's relevant. If you could put that in the chat, that would be great. You know, I think it's nice both for me to see, but it's also nice for you to be able to see with each other where you're all coming from. Also, Virginia has activated the closed captioning, so that is available to you. And one thing that I really, one reason I really like doing this is so that you all can see just how accurate or inaccurate the auto transcription feature is on Zoom. And it's a fun little experiment. It can be really useful. It certainly can be more helpful than no captioning, but it is a fun experiment to kind of see where it sometimes goes wrong. So I encourage you to take a peek at those as we go. So we have limited time today. I'm going to try and move pretty quickly. but I want to reassure you that I will be providing both the PDF of this PowerPoint as well as I actually have a PDF resource packet ready for all of you. We're hoping to send that out along with the recordings and the recording sometime early next week. So just know there is information coming your way, and that resource packet is going to be both links and actual PDFs of some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So don't worry if you don't jot it down or remember it from today, or if we don't dig into enough detail, it will be coming your way. So for today, I want to kind of give you a big picture view about accessibility and try and get you started broadening how you're thinking about accessibility. I'm also going to talk about, kind of an overview of types of programmatic access and proactive planning. Checklists are an incredibly useful tool, and I'm going to be pointing you in the direction of some checklists, but a checklist is not a mindset, shouldn't be the mindset. And so that's part of wanting to expand how we even think about what accessibility is. I'm also going to be pointing you in the direction of some of my favorite resources that I myself use on a regular basis. And those will be pointing you in that direction for further exploration on your own. So some important context of laws. The first is the Rehabilitation Act. And these are kind of the two most well-known accessibility laws that you may have heard of before. Section 504 is the piece of the Rehabilitation Act that is probably most relevant to those of us on this call today. And that is because it relates to anyone who is any programs happening within the federal government and or that are receiving funding from the federal government. So any of us who've ever received a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts or the National Endowment for the Humanities or any other federal agency, this applies to us. The Americans with Disabilities Act is, of course, the most well-known. And this is likely the one that you have heard of. Oh, I realized I didn't finish the sentence on this slide. Sorry, guys. I will fix that for the PDF, but Title II is one that may be relevant to some of you, and that is state and local governments. And Title III is public accommodations. So those are the two sections that are probably most relevant to those of us on the call today. Public accommodations includes anyone who's doing things for the public. It includes private businesses as well as nonprofits. So that's, I think, between those two covers all of us. So the key principles of the ADA were physical access, program modifications, so accommodations, and effective communication. And we'll talk about each of those a little bit more along the way. So I do want to share, as I said, checklists and numbers are not the only mindset for accessibility, but they are important context. So according to the ADA, a person with a disability is a person with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. 26% of adults in the US have some type of disability. That's 61 million adults. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see a graph that breaks down some of the different types of functional disability that make up that 61 million folks. So you can kind of get a sense of some of that. So I'm so sorry, I'm going to pause for just a second. We've got to move the chat box out of the way. Okay. Oh. All right. I also wanted to say that these laws came about through a lot of really hard work and self-advocacy and activism from people with disabilities. And they have had to fight very hard for rights. Considering that the Americans with Disability Act was only passed in 1990, it was not that long ago. And it still is something that is not completely in effect as it was intended. So I think that's just an important thing for us to keep in mind, especially as we think about disability, community, and culture. You know, as folks who are involved in culture work in some way or involved in cultural programming, I want us to think about, how do we identify a community? How do we identify a cultural group? This is something that we do on a regular basis in our work in other contexts. And as cultural workers, we look at shared experiences. We look at shared identities, shared language. We look at, how are these cultural values or cultural norms passed from person to person through observation, learning from family, and in the case of disability, especially learning from peers, for those folks who maybe they are the only member of their family who has a disability. You know, I want us to think about the differences in disability, community, and culture and identity when it comes to temporary or permanent disabilities, visible and invisible disabilities. Identity politics in terms of self-advocacy and activism that many people choose to be engaged in. And I think a really key piece to understand is that this is all within the context of how people with disabilities not only interact with each other, but also their experiences interacting with society as a whole and with people who do not have disabilities. And so part of disability community and culture and identity is often tied to this affirmation and sense of belonging that comes from being part of a disability community. And so there's a couple key things to say here in terms of, you know, it's important to note that not everyone who, by the ADA definition, has a disability, not everyone identifies as having a disability or being part of a disability community. We're seeing this increasingly so as we have the largest aging population we've ever had in this country. And we have folks who are increasingly needing the same sort of accommodations and access that folks with disabilities need, but they are not necessarily identifying themselves as such. They aren't part of a disability community. One great example of that is my dad. My dad has hearing aids. He's had hearing aids for 15 years, but he does not identify as part of the deaf community. And so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. It's also really important to note, right? Like, as many different disabilities as there are, and as many different ways that each individual person experiences that disability, that's how many different possible disability communities there are. There is no one disability community, but we can look at some of these pieces that we know are part of shared culture and shared community. And we can look at those and understand disability as community and culture. I also added here this, what was really has become the slogan of disability advocacy and activism, which is nothing about us without us. And that's just a phrase I want you to keep in mind as we're moving through, and we'll talk more about that. So I have all of this here because I want to say, in terms of shifting how we think about disability, as culture workers, we are trained to understand that we work with people who have different experiences than we do, different experiences than our own. We strive to, and we learn how to communicate through that and to adapt our approach based on the needs or the cultural preferences and practices of the people we're working with. So my proposal to you today is to start including disability in that mindset. Think of disability as culture. Think of disability as a way that people experience the world. And take that same consideration you do to all of the rest of the culture work that you do, and just add disability to that. So that's kind of the framework that I want you to think about as we go into this today. It can I'm hoping it can help us be more expansive and proactive in the way that we approach accessibility. And if that's not enough for you, it's for those of us who are doing public facing programming, it's also just straight up good customer service. So, at that 26% of adults in the US, if you're just remember that, because if you're not reaching folks with disabilities, then you're not reaching all of your community. So, that's always a thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a minute and reshare so we can watch a brief, quick 3-minute video. It is one of my favorite accessibility training tools, both for when I talk to folks and also when I've been in trainings. I'm hoping it just sort of helps break the ice for talking about and working with and interacting with people with disabilities. It is from the DCA Office of Disability Rights. So here we go.
Good morning, Bob.
Morning there, big man. Morning, Alice!
There's no need to be awkward.
Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities.
It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone.
Attention! Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping?
I got you.
Wait, ah! Oh no, might actually not.
If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing them only makes it weird for everyone.
What?
Please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't underestimate me just because I have a great smile.
Just because I'm blind.
May I help you?
Does not mean I'm deaf.
I don't know. I think he said he was going to come.
Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath. Relax. We don't bite.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello there, ladies. How are you?
Hello. And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi. Would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alice.
Morning.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
Not to get nervous about. It's the most terrifying thing most people do is talking in public.
All right. So I hope you guys like that video as much as I do. I have seen it a million times, and I still think it's one of the best that I've seen, because it does help. It acknowledges that discomfort that sometimes comes along with beginning the journey of working with folks with disabilities. And so I hope it helps make that part of that process at least a little bit less intimidating. All right, so let me get back to our presentation. Oh. There we go. All right, so to kind of get us started off in the practical section of today's presentation and workshop, I want to talk about the concept of universal design. And this is something that some of you may already be familiar with. And if you are, that's awesome. I bring it up because it is part of trying to think in advance about designing things from the ground up in the most accessible way possible for the most number of people. That is the goal of universal design. So making it available for use is part of that in the first place, making it easier to use, usability, and expanding the range of users, expanding the range of people who can access it. All of those together are part of universal design and the ability to make things accessible to the most number of people. So this is a concept that I just hope that you keep in mind for the next 40 minutes of the presentation today, but I also hope that you can start to identify it in your own work, identify places where you can come into your work, especially if you're thinking about communication and public programmings, where you can come into the work in the first place with this in mind, with this approach of how do I design something from the very start that I know is going to be the easiest for folks to reach, so that they don't have to ask for accommodations. We don't have to create 5 different versions of something to make it accessible, but really, are there ways we can approach it from the beginning with that in mind? So one example that you may not think about is automatic doors. Ramps, like those are both structural examples. As I said, this can be part of communication and part of programming, but even structurally as well. Like those are 2 examples that we probably each of us use on a nearly daily basis. We encounter things like automatic doors and ramps and elevators, right? That are tools that, yes, of course, they are useful to people with disabilities, but the rest, they're useful to us as well. And it expands that range of possible users. So just kind of be thinking through that and seeing the places where you can identify the potential for universal design in your own work. So the first thing I want to talk about, the first element of accessibility that I want to talk about in terms of, these like practical hands-on pieces is communication. Website communication, social media, your publications, accommodation statements, which we'll talk quite a bit about, and also just having your contact information accessible and having methods of communication that are accessible to folks. I do have my first favorite resource alert here, which is from the Graphic Artists Guild. This is a whole set of downloadable disability symbols. So these are fantastic. They are a standardized set of symbols that you can use. They were on my title slide. That's where I borrowed those from, and they are free for use. And so it's a really great resource when you're talking about any form of communication, website, social media, anything like that, and publications as well. So, yep, I highly encourage you to go check it out and download those files. So first up, websites. We're not going to talk a ton about websites today because that could be its whole own 5-hour training on its own. But a couple of the things that I want to just highlight as things to be aware of when it comes to website accessibility are alt text for images, video captions, your color contrast, your the language that you're using, the type of way that you're writing. Are you using plain, clear language? And of course, then other design and formatting components as well. For those of you who may not know, alt text is used, we're going to talk about it several times throughout today, and it is a visual description of an image, somewhat like what Virginia and I did at the beginning of the presentation today, where we each described ourselves. And I do have some resources for you specifically about practicing writing good alt text, but it's a way to help folks who are blind or low vision and potentially who are using a screen reader so that they can actually know what an image on the screen looks like, what that image is meant to communicate. So again, I promise I will be giving you resources specifically for practicing that. And once you get started practicing, the more you do it, the easier it will become to describe images. I have included some resources over here on the right-hand side. The World Wide Web Consortium is kind of considered sort of the main website accessibility resource. It's got a ton of information. Definitely go explore it if you would like. But again, there are tons of resources out there about website accessibility, and I encourage you all to go explore some of those. Social media, another favorite resource alert, is my all-time favorite go-to guide on accessible social media from Alexa Heinrich. Her website is fantastic. I use it all the time. In addition to all of my other roles, I'm also the social media manager for my agency for New Mexico Arts, and I use Alexa's information regularly. So just a couple things I wanted to highlight are hashtags. If you have or have not heard of camel case hashtags, this is a great example of universal design in some ways of this means capitalizing the first letter of each word in a hashtag. And guess what? It helps me too. It's designed specifically for ease of screen readers so that they can actually distinguish what the words are in a hashtag and they don't just blend together. But let me tell you, that helps me tremendously as a user of social media as well. It's a great example of one of those things that helps everyone. Again, alternative text. A lot of the social media platforms have a way for you to actually add that alt text when you're prepping your photo to post. So again, Alexa, I highly recommend going to Alexa's website because she will walk you through what that is like, and you can find some great resources about how to add that alt text. And then captioning videos, as you can see from the example of the Zoom captions today, right? A lot of social media platforms, YouTube and Vimeo as well, and not Vimeo, but YouTube and Facebook both will do auto captioning. Be wary, those are a great place to start, and it is amazing technology to have at our disposal, but truly useful captions still require a human touch, so just keep that in mind. Publications, again, a favorite resource alert here. Two different things. One is a presentation from Art of Access, which is a group based in Denver. They had a great presentation recently. Oh, sorry guys, there's construction happening at my house. Sorry if you can hear the saws outside the door. They had a great presentation recently last year about accessible graphic design. I highly encourage you to go check that one out. And then also the Smithsonian Guidelines for Accessible Publications is one that I have referred back to many, many times. So things to think about in your publications, both in print and digital. Again, design format and color contrast and other design elements. Also, what language you're using. How clearly are you communicating what the information you're trying to get out. Again, thinking about things being screen reader compatible. So for those of you who may or may not know, as I mentioned, screen readers are used by folks with low vision or people who are blind to be able to access digital platforms, websites, all sorts of digital user platforms, PDFs and Word documents, anything in a digital format. And so there are a lot of resources out there. There are some great tools that can help you check if your stuff is screen reader compatible. We're not going to dig into that, but just know that there are some resources, and I'll make sure to include some of that information in the resource list that we send out to you guys. I also want to encourage everybody to go play around. If you haven't already, go play around with the Adobe Accessibility Check tool. It's a lot of info, but they do a really good job of walking you through and explaining, flagging things that may not be screen reader compatible or accessible in other ways, and explaining to you how to fix it and why it needs fixing. So it's a really fun tool. It's in the toolbox section of Adobe Acrobat. So I encourage you to go play around with it. The other thing to think about with publications is that you may want to think about how to provide this information in alternative formats. And we'll talk a little bit more about alternative formats in the next section when we talk about accommodations, but I just want to bring it up here. So another key piece about communication is accommodation statements. And you may have noticed when you registered for this webinar, there was a sentence in there that said, if you have questions about accessibility or need to request an accommodation, please contact Virginia. And then it included Virginia's contact information. And it gave a clear timeline as well of how far in advance to please make that request. So an accommodation request is just for you to be aware that members of the public with disabilities can request reasonable accommodations for events or meetings, in person, virtual, or they can request alternative formats of materials that you're providing in order to meet their access needs. And this is a great thing, because you can't plan, no matter how proactive you want to be or how much you're thinking about universal design, you won't be able to plan for everything. And so accommodation statements are fantastic, both for you as the organization and for the person with a disability who is trying to access your programs or your organization. This can range everywhere from a cited guide for in-person things, a cited guide, so someone to help guide the person when they arrive on site. It can include live captioning. It can include requesting an ASL interpreter. It may include, specific wheelchair accessible seating if, depending on the venue and the location. But it can also include things like a large print version of a document, or even a Braille version of a document. Or audio description recordings of something that you provide. So these are all sorts of things that could potentially be requested. Part of the resource packet that I'm going to give you is my language that I use to include accommodation statements in all of our press releases and our event promotions at New Mexico Arts, as well as the accommodation statement form that I came up with for our staff to use if we receive an accommodation, because that's a key piece of this. It's great to have an accommodation statement like the one we did on this registration, but if nobody on your staff or nobody who's working on this project with you knows what to do next, if you get a request, then it can only get you so far. One thing I want to say is this is also a great opportunity to, if you do some of that planning in advance, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, or in the next section. If you are planning in advance and you already know that you're going to have live captioning, even if someone doesn't request it, you're just building it in to your public event. Advertise that, let people know, be sure to say this event will be captioned. That can be really useful. You know, folks with disabilities so often are met with roadblocks when they're trying to access things. And those of us in the arts and culture field are not immune to that. Like we absolutely put up accidental roadblocks to people with disabilities accessing our organizations and our programming all the time without realizing it. And it is really fantastic when someone with a disability can know in advance, great, there's already going to be captioning at that. I don't have to call and make a special request. I'm so much more likely to go to that event if I know that I don't have to take those extra steps just to be able to attend and enjoy this performance or this lecture or artist demonstration, whatever it may be. So when you have that stuff in place, advertise it, let people know. Language use. This is another one that could be really long. For the sake of time, I'm, want to try and keep it brief, but this is important. It's a really important one. This slide, I have a couple slides about language use. This one is focused on person first versus identity first language. So person first, an example would be talking about the person before the disability. So a person who is blind, person with limited mobility. And this comes out of an effort to move away from some of the harmful and limiting language that we have used in the past. What I really want to stress, though, is that person first is a great place to start, but it's not everyone's language choice. There are a lot of folks with disabilities who prefer identity first. A lot of folks who do identify really strongly that their disability is an essential part of who they are. And they do want to be identified by that identity first. So for instance, deaf person instead of person who is deaf, or autistic person instead of person who's autistic. And I pulled those two examples because the deaf community, capital D deaf community, and autism community are two groups who really do utilize identity first language on a really regular basis. And that is because for many of those folks, that disability is a part of who they are, an ingrained part of who they are, and they want that to be part of their identity. So if you aren't sure, this is great. We have been practicing with pronouns now for a while, many of us, and a similar approach can be used here. If you are not sure whether the person would like to be described using person first or identity first language, just ask. And just know that preferences vary, but person first is a pretty safe bet to start. If you aren't sure, just ask. Here's a little bit more about language use. I also have another resource flagged here that I really encourage everybody to go look at. That's where some of this language explanation, where I've borrowed that from. It's from the ADA National Network. So a couple other things to keep in mind is to emphasize abilities and not limitations. So wheelchair user or person who uses a wheelchair rather than wheelchair bound, which is a very limiting type of phrase. Trying to strive for neutral language. Putting the emphasis on the need for accessibility rather than the presence of a disability. And the same thing goes for when we're talking about accommodations as well. We want to focus on what we can focus on, the accessibility need and not the disability. Steer clear of condescending euphemisms. I think probably many come to mind. I am not going to list them here for you today, but I think you can probably think of several that even in my lifetime have really shifted out of acceptable use, which is great. We love, it's good to see language use shifting when it comes to historically marginalized communities. Same goes for offensive language. Again, I think you can probably think of some examples. In terms of condescending euphemisms, I should clarify, You will still see special education utilized within education, but outside of the education system, special is one of those euphemisms that is being phased out by disability communities. It is not special. It is not inspirational. They are not differently abled. They are people who have access needs. We all have access needs, and everyone's access needs are different. It's also important to think about language that perpetuates negative stereotypes. Again, I'm sure you can think of some of your own examples. I actually have 3 different language guides that I'm going to include in the resource packet for you. This one that I've linked here, as well as 2 from the National Endowment for the Arts, that will go through some of this and give you examples of, like, instead of saying this phrase, try this. And I find those really helpful. And really what it comes down to is do your best. Make the effort to try to shift your language. You may not always get it right, but it's important to try. One keyword similar to the special education one that I want to point out is handicapped. So you're still going to see that in a lot of places, especially on official signage, parking spaces, things like that. It's another one that's being phased out. I tend to refer, we do most often see it in terms of handicap access or handicap parking spaces. And I've started switching to accessible parking spaces and accessible access. And that's been, a pretty easy switch to make, but don't be alarmed. You will still see it on signage, even though it's been being phased out. These things take time. Okay, this slide is going to be real quick. Internal accessibility. This is incredibly important, but it's not what we're here to focus on today. I put it here because I want you to be thinking about it. I want you to think about, how am I, or the organization that I'm involved with, how are we accessible internally? Not just about when we're doing programs, but us as we exist. What are our hiring practices like? How do we interact with staff and volunteers? Do we have staff and volunteers who have disabilities? If we had a staff member or volunteer with a disability start, would we know what to do? What about our physical space, our physical office space? What about doing a self-assessment? There are some great tools for organizational self-assessment out there, specifically geared towards arts and culture organizations. That will be part of the resource packet that we'll be sending out to you, because there are some really great step-by-step ways you can go through. And another key piece of internal accessibility to think about is your staff training. Finding ways to start to train your staff about accessibility broadly, or about specific aspects. Whoever's going to be answering the phone, here's what you need to know. Whatever it may be, just be thinking about these 6 things. Okay, now there's 15 minutes left to get to the bulk of it. This is always how it goes, isn't it? I'm going to pause for a minute to say, does anybody have any questions about what we've gone over so far before I dig into public programming? You feel free to put something in the chat or to unmute and ask a question if you have any questions. I also will we'll also have time for questions at the end. Virginia, I can't see the chat at the moment, but if anything comes up, will you let me know? Okay.
I sure will.
Thank you. All right. So I know we've been powering through this. I really wanted to devote quite a bit of time to public programming, because that is part of what we are here today to talk about, right? Obviously, right now, people are doing an interesting mix of virtual and in-person, and we are never quite sure what something is going to be. Sometimes even we plan, and it turns out we have to change, like it is as we have all been saying over and over, it's unprecedented times. So I think, just being prepared knowing that there are some great tools for virtual events. If you are doing virtual events, there's also some great stuff you can be doing for in-person, and some of it is going to be the same. So for virtual events, the main things I encourage everybody to keep in mind are captioning. So as we said today, we have the Zoom enabled, the platform, the built-in platform feature of the Zoom captioning so that you can see how, for better or worse, how it goes. Virginia says, hey, it's descriptive. That's very true. Also, Lisa, I love your story about alt text. I'm going to read that out in just a minute. So captioning, you can have third-party captioning services caption your virtual events on Zoom, on other similar video platforms. I highly encourage you to look into it. There are a lot of, one of the amazing benefits of virtual events that we've been seeing in the last several years is that you do not have to have a person on site doing your live captioning for you. Because it's a Zoom event, they can be in a remote location and they can be part of the Zoom call, providing those live captions for you, which have a much higher accuracy rate than the Zoom auto transcribe ones. Another great thing about captioning is if you're recording your event, you then have the transcript that you can use to provide closed captioning for your video if you're sharing it. This is especially true of like performances or videos that you may be wanting to share after the fact. Same goes for sign language interpretation. It is now easier than ever to have a sign language interpreter at your virtual event because they do not have to be at your event in person to provide sign language interpretation. It's a fantastic, it's been a fantastic thing about virtual events. Visual descriptions. So a really brief example is what Virginia and I did at the beginning of today's presentation, but also in terms of describing what's going on, if whether it's a video, whether it's a presentation, is finding ways to provide that visual description. Sometimes you can build it in, sometimes it's something that there's actually ways to provide on a separate audio channel. I really encourage you, whatever platform you're using for your virtual events, dig into the details of that, what's possible on that specific platform, because there are some amazing tools out there that you may not even know are possible that really will make your event more accessible from the outset without people having to request special access. So I do have another favorite resource alert here, which is National Endowment for the Arts. They created toward the beginning of COVID, the Accessibility Office of the NEA created a resource page specifically for helping to ensure that your virtual events are accessible to people with disabilities. Some great info on that page. So Lisa's, speaking of alt text for images, this goes for virtual events as well, right? Especially if it's videos or slideshows or things like that, is finding ways to share that alt text and those visual descriptions. And Lisa shared a great story in the chat about writing some alt text for images. So I go check that out in the chat if you haven't seen it yet. That's a great one, Lisa. Okay. So that's the basics for virtual events. In person, this slide is the main slide about public programming for in-person events that I'm going to share, because there is so much that you can possibly do. There's so much that you can do in advance, and there's so much that you can be prepared to provide if someone requests it. And it's impossible to cover all of it. So what I hope from this slide is that you can see these are some of the main things that float to the top when I'm talking to people about their in-person events. These are some of the main things that I encourage folks to think about in advance. And this is, of course, a spot where, like I said before, checklists are an amazing tool. They are a fantastic tool. But public programming, especially in-person events, is also a place where all of the work that you've done that goes into that communication that we spent some time talking about, and some of that internal accessibility, this is where all of that work that's gone into that can really set you up really well for your in-person events. Because if you're clearly communicating to your audience about what accessibility features are already going to be there. You're communicating your wayfinding, and you're communicating in advance what the physical space is like, what the parking and access is going to be like. You are setting yourself up for success, and you're setting up folks with disabilities up for success to know that they are going to be able to come to your event. So all of that is really key to ensuring that you are reaching as many people as you are wanting to be reaching, right? Remember that 26% of the population, of the adult population in the US, has a disability. And again, you're not going to be able to plan for every eventuality, but you can do some things that will help both you and audience members or participants of your programs be able to know in advance and feel comfortable that they're going to be able to access what you're doing. So a lot of this info, I just want to assure you before I dig into some of it, is going to be in that resource packet. So for instance, physical space. There is, let me grab it real quick. There is an awesome resource that I look at regularly from the NEA and the Kennedy Center, and it's called Design for Accessibility, a Cultural Administrator's Handbook. I actually have hard copies of this, many hard copies of this, these spiral bound. If you are interested in me popping one in the mail to you, just email me sometime, anytime, email me and send me your address and let me know you want one, and I will get one in the mail to you, because this is a fantastic resource, not just for events, but for your physical space. It has information about display and exhibit space. I'm obviously not turning to the right pages for that. It has information about assistive listening devices. Thank you, Virginia. Virginia just put my email address in the chat. It's on later slides as well. But yeah, honestly, I have many copies of this, and I would love to send it out to folks. I find it to be a really useful resource. So thinking about your physical space, thinking about displays and exhibits. I know, thank you all for putting your info in the chat box for us to see. I know that we have quite an interesting range of folks who are here, right? We have folks who are part of commissions on the arts and humanities. Shout out to Carrie. We have folks who are part of universities. We have Blaine here from National Folk Festival. So there's a wide range of, we have University of Arkansas Library folks here. We really do have an interesting range of folks. And so it's impossible to cover all of the information about your public programming, but for everyone, these are some of the key pieces to be thinking about. So along with your physical space, be thinking about performance spaces. If you are putting on performances, what does your seating look like? What does your ticketing look like? What's the number and the location of wheelchair accessible seating that you've included? Are you having captioning or ASL? Do you have areas of seating that you know that folks who are going to utilize those services will be able to actually see the ASL interpreter? Be thinking about videos and audio you might be sharing, even at in-person events, captioning those videos. ASL interpretation, CART, live captioning. CART is an acronym that stands for captioning access real time. Yes. But it basically means live captioning, having somebody there. Thinking about, can you plan to implement some sensory friendly programming? Your tactile tours. Tactile tours are amazing. I had never done tactile tours until I was at Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and it became my favorite thing that I did as accessibility coordinator for the festival, was to lead tactile tours for visitors who were blind or low vision. It was an incredible experience. Finding ways to work those experiences into what you're already doing. Being aware of service animals. I have an entire resource that I'm going to share with you just about service animals. So there's tons of information to think about. And again, checklists, right? Here's a great one. I know this is really small text because I wanted to get it all on one slide. So I have the link there for when I send you this PDF. This is a starting place checklist from the NEA. They provide this and have for years to folks who make it available to those of us who receive federal funding. But I think it's useful for everybody. And it's a great place to start. Of course, again, it can't cover literally everything, but it also can go along very nicely. They even mention it with this Design for Accessibility handbook. So it's a great place to start, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's really useful to have a checklist, because otherwise I know that this can all start to feel really overwhelming. It can feel like information overload very easily. And so having, thank you, Virginia, amazing. So she just put the link to it in the chat. Thank you. Having that checklist to help get you started, I feel like is really useful. Okay, I know we're getting close to the end, but I really want to talk about, out of all of those things, what are some, those are things that anyone who's putting on an event should be thinking about. What are some of the things that, for those of us who are doing arts or culture related programming, what are some of the things that we specifically should be thinking about? Language translation is one of them. Sometimes that gets grouped in with accessibility and sometimes it doesn't. It's not disability related, but it certainly is access related. So just keep in mind, what's your audience for your program? Who are your participants in your program? And are you going to need language translation services and planning for that well in advance? Another thing to think about, especially for cultural programming, names and specialized vocabulary. One of the examples that comes to mind for me is running narrative stages at a festival, or artist demonstrations, or cooking demonstrations. There are going to be proper nouns and very specialized vocabulary that your ASL interpreter or a caption provider may not be familiar with. So it's really great if you can get that type of information in advance and provide it to your service providers so that they can be prepared. This is also true of music performances. Captioners and ASL interpreters will ask for lyrics to songs in advance so that they can prepare. That's a very specialized skill. And it's great to be able to provide them with some of that in advance, because it ensures that they are able to interpret and translate the best they possibly can. Another thing to think about is identifying and finding culturally relevant providers. Take a moment to think about the cultural identity or the community that you are either serving or who you are presenting, and look into finding captioners, or especially ASL interpreters, who have some connection to that community, because again, there will be cultural nuance that they will be able to understand and interpret and translate in a way that someone who doesn't have any of that cultural knowledge may not be able to. This is not always possible, but it's a great thing to try. I also think revisiting that idea of expanding how we think about accessibility and disability. Approach your cultural programming accessibility with that same desire for cultural awareness as you would any other cultural programming. We are already thinking about the cultural needs and preferences and practices of the groups we're working with. So expand that to try to incorporate your own cultural awareness about working with folks with disabilities. And that's not a one-time thing, that's an ongoing process, certainly, which we will talk about in just a second. But these are some of the things to think about. So part of that cultural awareness, part of approaching accessibility with culture in mind. This applies to public programs, large events, small events, in-person, virtual. It applies to those informal gatherings that we as cultural workers may find ourselves participating in the arts and humanities, right? It's not always a big formalized public event. Sometimes it's a small gathering of community scholars or a gathering of artists, whatever it may be. Bring this approach to all of your types of events. Bring this approach to when you're thinking about both your audience and when you're thinking about your participants. Are you doing an artist demonstration with someone? Are you doing a narrative stage? Are you asking someone to talk about their personal experiences? So thinking both about audience and participants. So part of this, a huge piece of this cultural approach to accessibility is understanding that we need to adapt our approach and our communication based on the needs of who we're working with. We should be planning for participant comfort and ease of engagement. And guess what? These are things we're already doing as folks who are interacting with the public, as folks who are involved in the arts and culture and humanities. These are things we're already naturally doing. We already know that we should be adapting our communication. We already know that we are striving to make our participants comfortable and make it possible for them to engage. So what I want you to take away from today is to add disability to that mindset. So, connecting. The best thing that you can possibly do is to connect with people with disabilities. Some ways to do that. Identify local, regional, and national agencies and organizations. I have a resource slide for you that covers some of those. And I know we're a couple minutes over. We're wrapping up, I promise. Reach out to disability groups in your area. Talk to volunteers, staff, audience members, visitors, whatever way it is that you interact with the public. Talk to folks who have disabilities, who are interacting with your program. Connect with other arts, culture, and humanity organizations in your area, in your region. You can help each other. You can serve as, accountability for each other. You can share resources. Really, truly, it's a great thing to do. So revisiting this slogan, nothing about us without us, that it has been part of disability communities and disability activism and advocacy for 40 plus years, but it is shifting. More and more we are seeing folks in disability communities and people with disabilities saying nothing without us. Not just nothing about us without us, not just, hey, you shouldn't be making policy about disability without talking to disability folks, but truly everything should take folks with disabilities into consideration. This should be built into what you are doing. Oh, Sarah, this is fantastic. Sarah just added to the chat. Thank you. University of Arkansas has a disabilities employee impact group for anyone who's interested. That's fantastic. That's exactly the type of thing to be looking for in your agencies, in, whether that's a university, a government agency, a nonprofit, finding those resources within your agencies, within your larger umbrella agencies. That's really fantastic. Again, the best thing you can do is to connect with people with disabilities. So your next steps that I hope you come away from today with: explore resources. Again, I promise you, I am sending you some amazing resources in a packet that will be coming to you next week. And you can start to dig into those and you can find out which of these pieces are things that are going to be helpful to me. Don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot of resources. Just get started. Get started looking at some of them and see where it takes you. Identify some local organizations. That's a great next step. Identify local organizations, whether that's organizations who are part of your connected to your agency already, or whether that's informal groups or nonprofits. Try and identify some of those. Just start Googling and see what comes up. Consider starting a self-assessment process. Again, one of the resources I'll send you is some information about doing a self-assessment process specifically for arts and culture organizations. So, taking those steps to get started on understanding where are we at right now. And one of the best things about doing a self-assessment, even if it's a really surface level one, is it helps guide you to know what you should do next. Because the main thing I want you to do after today is to find one thing, make one change in what you're doing, whether that's in your personal practice and it's, I'm going to commit to changing the language that I use, or whether it is finding one thing in your programming that you are going to commit to captioning all of your videos, or if it is making your organization wide, making all of your PDFs accessible documents. Pick one thing and go for it. And the reason I say this is because accessibility is a marathon, not a sprint. There is always going to be something more that you can do to be more accessible. And that can feel overwhelming, but instead try to think of it as an opportunity. The important thing is that you are starting. You are making that one step to start this journey of continuous improvement of accessibility. So I hope that that's an encouraging thing and not a daunting thing. That is how I try to reframe it for myself anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed or daunted by how much there is left to do, is I know that I am going to pick one thing and make that one change that will get me a little bit further down the path. So a couple things to think about as resources, organizations, and agencies nationally. National Endowment for the Arts Accessibility Office has a lot of resources on their website, so I've linked to that here. I have created an arts accessibility resource list. There are arts and culture and humanities organizations. There's a lot of stuff on this list that's going to be helpful to you. That'll be part of your packet as well, but I've linked to it here. In general, the ADA National Network. So for those of you who are in Arkansas today, the ADA National Network actually has these regional offices as well. We are in the same region, New Mexico and Arkansas, which I think this is like the only time I've ever seen us in the same region of a map of anything. So I was excited to see that. But the National Network has some incredible resources, fact sheets and guides, but they also offer trainings. Both the National Network and the regional offices offer trainings and webinars that you can go back and watch. So I really encourage you to scope out the ADA National Network. It's fantastic. There's going to be a lot of info on there that may not be relevant to you, but it can be really helpful. I also encourage all of you, as I said, I am part of the State Arts Agency. I am the ADA 504 coordinator for the New Mexico State Arts Agency. Every state arts agency has a designated person who's in charge of accessibility. Not all of them do external programming. Every state is different. Every person's role is different. Some people, this is their full-time, 100% of their time is devoted to this. For folks like me, it is a portion of my time. But regardless of how it's set up, I really encourage you to go seek out who that person is for your state. For those of you in Arkansas, I can provide that contact info as well. But I encourage you to go seek out that person and find out what they're doing. Maybe they aren't doing external stuff. Maybe they are. There's a bunch of states that have webinar series that are then up on their websites that anyone from any state could go watch and listen to. I also really encourage you to check if your state has a government agency or a commission that is focused on disability. Arkansas, I was able to find some information, not a ton, but for instance, in New Mexico, we have a commission for the deaf and hard of hearing, we have a commission for the blind, and we have the overall Governor's Commission on Disability. So just again, start Googling, see what you can find, looking for your state's commissions that are focused on either disability overall or various aspects. You know, it can be a really great resource. Our Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing has some amazing fact sheets and stuff like that, but then also the Governor's Commission on Disability provides free disability awareness trainings. I've scheduled like 5 of them for our grantees, for my fellow co-workers in the Department of Cultural Affairs. It's been really fantastic to have access to. They also do site visits to help with your site accessibility. So really can be some great resources, so scope it out. There's also a bunch of links. Again, a lot of these will be included in that packet that we send out to you next week, but I wanted to link them here because they're things that I have referenced today. So the ADA National Network has a fact sheet about effective communication. That's where I got some of the stuff about language. Also, we'll talk about communication methods. The Smithsonian pre-visit resources are great if you want to start digging into sensory-friendly stuff. I will have more resources about that as well. The Smithsonian Guides for Accessible Exhibit Design, Smithsonian Accessible Publication Design, which I highlighted earlier, the Design for Accessibility. This whole booklet is available as a PDF, but again, if you want me to mail it to you, I'm happy to mail it to you. And ADA National Network fact sheet about service animals is one of my go-to things as well. So thank you. I know we went a little over, but I am here to stick around for questions. I know that was so much information. It's like absolute information overload, but I am gonna I'm going to stick around for questions for quite a while. I've included my contact information here. Please feel free to contact me, either of my email addresses and my phone number. Contact me anytime. If you just want to chat about accessibility, if you have specific questions in mind, let me know. I'm happy to talk through stuff. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other in case anybody wants to unmute and ask questions.
Thank you so much, Lilli. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat, but feel free to unmute yourself or dive right in.
I know that was so much info. Thanks for sticking it out with me, you guys.
Let's see here.
And yeah, Lori, I'm glad to hear that you're looking forward to looking at the resource guide and thinking about a self-assessment. You know what, one thing I want to say is just there's so much, and it's, you know, what I was hoping for today was to get you started thinking about it and to kind of reframe your approach possibly, but really also just get you started thinking about it. That's the best you can do in a one webinar, you know. So yeah, I do hope it's a jumping off point for folks.
I have a question. So one of the things that I do for Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts is sort of go out into communities. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we go into places that aren't very well funded and don't really have spaces that are very accessible. Although they will have some capabilities. Are there things that you would advice that you would offer for working with those communities, so that I guess I wouldn't want to actually say anything to the people in those organizations so much as just try to be prepared for issues?
Absolutely, Lauren. I think that's a really, really good point. And something I didn't touch on at all, but absolutely something I think about a lot as I go out and work with, you know, really small nonprofits or community driven organizations who are trying to do work. It can be hard, I think, especially with venue accessibility. It can be something that comes up a lot. Is there's only so much you can do about, you know, making a space accessible. Especially if it's a historic building. I know that's a big topic of discussion so often. You know, what I would say is there's a lot that folks can do that isn't costly. You know, I think a lot of the time there is this fear of, oh my gosh, if we try and do this accommodation, like, oh, this is going to cost us a lot. That can be a big roadblock for folks to trying to make things more accessible. I think in terms of being more accessible from the outset, I think that especially at a low cost, communication is what's key. So encouraging those organizations to make their contact information clear and to have ways that people can get in touch with them in advance so that they know what may or may not be possible, because there may be things that they aren't able to do or aren't able to provide or aren't able to figure out an accommodation for. But there may be some things they can, and with enough time and planning, that can be possible to do. And so really setting up from the start that possibility for clear communication, I think really helps in those situations, because it doesn't cost anything to be available for communication and be open to communication, right? So that's a low cost thing that gives them that opportunity to find out in advance what types of what ways they can be a little bit more accessible. So that would be a starting place, but also thinking about you may not be able to thanks, Blaine. You may not be able to provide an ASL interpreter for everything. That, like, there is a cost associated. It is much less than a lot of people think, but there are some of those things that they may not be able to do, but they can at least make the good faith effort to hear from folks about what might be needed. I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that more and more as I'm talking myself in circles answering your question, I am coming back to continuously coming back to this idea of starting with open communication is a great place to start from.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually think just having open communication can be a little intimidating sometimes. So just having you say that was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. Virginia, do you have your hand up?
I do. I have a question. I was just wondering though, so what worst case scenario, and you have a program and there's an accommodation that you cannot meet, how do you handle that?
That is a fantastic question, and it happens. It does. It's doesn't necessarily happen often, but it does happen. So part of what you guys will see in some of my example documents about accommodation requests that I'll send along, part of that is acknowledging that you may not be able to do to accomplish the originally requested accommodation, but what you should do is you should work with that person to find out what else might be possible. So for instance, if someone were to contact me 3 days before a meeting requesting a Braille version of a handout, I would not be able to accomplish that accommodation request. I would not be able to fulfill that accommodation request in that amount of time. It takes months to get something printed in Braille. As part of state government, the amount of time it would take me even to get permission to spend the $100 to get something turned into a Braille document is, months. So, but what I would do then is I would go back to that person and I would say, in the amount of time that we have, it will not be possible to provide you with a Braille document. Is there an alternative format that would work for you? And then, as you get more comfortable with what some of these options are, you can start to suggest things as well. You can say, I would be able to provide you an audio description of this document, or I can provide you with a screen reader compatible PDF of this document. I can give it to you on a CD or a thumb drive, or I can email it to you, whatever method of doing it to you. But so those are the types of things that you can do. Is you can say it is okay. Sometimes you are going to have to say, like, I'm not able to fulfill this. It happens. But what the best approach to do is to then immediately follow up with that person and find out what's the next best option that I am able to accomplish. Because that is not only showing that you are taking this seriously and you are wanting to make sure this person has access, but it's also in line with reasonable accommodation. I mean, like in terms of both, I hope people think about this, both in terms of good customer service, but also, yeah, as much as I want you to think more broadly and, you know, a little bit more feelingsy and person focused about it, also it is compliance, right? It is part of a federal set of laws about compliance. But by making your best effort to make reasonable accommodations, you are fulfilling that compliance piece. Yeah, I hope that helped. Great.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Anybody else? You also are welcome to email me if you think of questions, like as soon as you hit end, you know, leave meeting and you're like, oh my gosh, you know what I should have asked her about, like, you know, whatever. I can't even think of a good fake question. You're welcome to email me. Honestly, as you may or may not have been able to tell, I get excited talking about accessibility stuff. I thank you for the reminder. Just a little bit more about my background in terms of what stuff I may be able to help you with is that, you know, I have done large scale physical space festival, you know, multi-component performance and performances and artist demonstrations. And I've done that work in a festival setting, but I also have spent the last 7 years helping arts organizations access the resources that they need to help themselves be more accessible, both internally and in their programming. So, yeah. And, you know, I also want to encourage you all by saying, I hope in a hopeful way, by saying, like, I've been doing this work for 10 years and I'm still learning. There are still things that I am learning. And that's why I say that, you know, taking the next, whatever the next step is picking one thing and taking that step is the way to go, because there will always be more to learn. I know folks who've been doing this work for 30 years and are still learning. So that's a positive thing, not a discouraging thing, I hope. And I hope you all go forth today and figure out what your one thing you want to change is. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Well, thank you all. I think we can go ahead and call this webinar adjourned, but feel free to stick around if you have any questions for Lilli.